Ethan Cole was not a man of many words. He worked quietly at the outer edge of the desert, where a small human repair outpost sat under the burning twin suns. The station was made of old metal walls, wires, and sand-covered solar panels that hummed all day. Most people there worked because they had no better place to go. Ethan, too, was one of them. A quiet mechanic who fixed everything that came from the sky. He didn't look like someone important. His shirt was always dusty, his boots worn out, his hands rough from years of work. But he was known for one thing. He could fix anything, no matter how broken. Some said he had a gift for machines, that he could listen to them like they spoke to him. He never confirmed that rumor. He just kept working day after day. That morning started like any other. Ethan was tightening bolts on a transport engine when the sky suddenly split with light. The ground shook as a silver craft descended, a design none of the workers had ever seen before. It didn't land like a normal ship. It glided down in complete silence, almost graceful, until the sand burst under it. Everyone stepped back, shielding their eyes. The air shimmered with heat and energy. When the doors opened, soldiers in black armor came out first. They were tall, with skin faintly tinted silver blue, and their eyes glowed faintly in the light. Behind them stepped a young woman in a pale blue gown made of shining silk that caught the sunlight like water. She was unlike anyone the station had ever seen. Tall, elegant, with silver hair tied behind her head and a cold expression that made the air feel heavy. She looked around as if everything near her was beneath her notice. Then one of her guards announced, "Her Highness Princess Aelira of the Varan Dominion." The workers whispered to each other. Even Ethan had heard that name. The Varans were one of the most advanced alien civilizations in the galaxy. They usually never set foot on human stations like this. Aelira spoke first, her voice calm but sharp. "We require repairs immediately," the station chief stuttered, trying to find his words. "Of course, Your Highness. Our best mechanic will take care of it." He looked quickly at Ethan. "Cole, you handle this one." Ethan wiped his hands on his cloth and stepped forward. He gave a small nod. "Show me the problem." Aelira raised her chin slightly. "Do you even understand Varan technology?" "I'll manage," Ethan said simply. That small answer seemed to offend her. Her silver eyes narrowed. "Humans are bold. Perhaps too bold for their own good." Her guards gave low laughs. Ethan didn't react. He just walked past them toward the ship carrying his tools. The princess frowned, not used to being ignored. Inside the craft, Ethan worked silently, scanning the engine. It was advanced, but not impossible to understand. Circuits were overloaded, likely from atmospheric entry. As he checked the lines, Aelira stood behind him, watching every move. "You are doing that wrong," she said coldly. He looked back at her. "If I were wrong, your ship would already be flying." Her mouth fell slightly open. No one had ever spoken to her like that. One of her guards stepped forward, but she raised a hand to stop him. "You are either very brave or very foolish, human." "Maybe both," Ethan said, returning to work. The next hour passed in silence. The hum of his tools filled the air. When he finally straightened up, he said, "Try it now." The ship started for a moment, then sputtered. Ethan frowned, adjusting a few lines. Aelira crossed her arms. "So much for your confidence." He ignored her again, checking the power core. The second attempt worked. The engine roared back to life, light pulsing evenly through the system. Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead. "You're good to go." For a second, Aelira almost thanked him, but pride stopped her. Instead, she turned to her guards and said loudly, "At least your species can follow simple instructions." The laughter of her crew echoed. Ethan froze. He didn't look up, didn't argue. His jaw tightened, and he put his tools back into the box one by one. Then, without a single word, he picked up his bag and walked away. Everyone around watched in surprise. No one had ever walked away from a royal alien. Not without permission, not without bowing. Aelira stared after him, confused. Something inside her shifted slightly, though she didn't understand why. The station chief tried to whisper, "Cole, come back." But Ethan just kept walking toward the edge of the compound, the sun burning above him. Later that evening, Aelira sat alone near her ship, looking at the desert stretching endlessly ahead. She could still see the image of the mechanic turning his back on her. It made her uneasy, even irritated. "How dare he?" she whispered to herself. Yet deep down, a strange curiosity began to form. No human had ever looked at her like that, without fear or admiration, just calm indifference. Meanwhile, Ethan sat on the roof of the workshop, watching the twin suns dip below the horizon. He thought of the young alien woman, her proud face, her sharp words. He wasn't angry, only tired. He had seen too many powerful people talk down to those who worked with their hands. To him, it didn't matter whether they were from Earth or another world. Pride always looked the same. In the distance, the Varan ship shimmered under the fading light. Ethan sighed, thinking the matter was done. But he didn't know that his quiet walk away had already changed something far greater than he imagined. Inside her quarters, Princess Elira could not sleep. Her thoughts kept returning to the human mechanic who had dared to ignore her title. For the first time in her life, someone had treated her like a person, not a princess, and that somehow felt far more powerful than any salute or bow she'd ever received. And though she didn't know it yet, that single moment, the insult, his silence, and the way he turned and left, was only the beginning of something that would change both of their worlds forever. The night fell over the desert, painting the station in shades of deep orange and purple. Ethan sat on the roof of the workshop, the wind carrying the faint scent of burned wires and hot metal. The hum of machines had quieted, leaving only the occasional whistle of the desert air. He thought he could finally rest, but something nagged at the back of his mind, the silver craft, the young princess, and her sharp, cold words. He wasn't sure why, but he felt responsible. Not for her pride or her anger, but for the ship. Machines, after all, deserved respect too, and if left unchecked, one wrong wire or a small mistake could lead to disaster. The thought pulled him off the roof and back into the workshop. Tools clinked as he checked engines that had been repaired that day, testing every wire, every connection. Ethan never liked unfinished work. Meanwhile, the princess could not stop thinking about him. She had spent her life surrounded by soldiers, advisors, and servants who always flattered her, always obeyed. No one had ever walked away from her before, not with dignity, not with quiet confidence, not with that strange calm in their eyes. Her pride, which had always been her strongest weapon, now felt like a shield that kept her from understanding something deeper. Early next morning, a new problem arose. The ship's internal navigation core began sending unusual signals, indicating a possible system overload. Elira's guards panicked. One by one, they rushed around the ship, checking screens, flipping switches, and shouting orders at each other. Ethan, who had returned to his small quarters for a moment, heard the commotion. Without hesitation, he grabbed his tools and walked calmly toward the ship. His steps were deliberate, quiet yet somehow commanding, as if the machines themselves recognized his presence. When he arrived, the scene was chaos. Sparks flickered from a console, alarms shrieked, and a small cloud of smoke curled from the ventilation ducts. The princess's guard stood frozen, unsure who could solve this disaster. Ethan didn't speak. He simply knelt beside the console, eyes scanning the problem. Elira stepped forward, her expression sharp. "This is your fault. Someone should fix it immediately," she snapped. Ethan didn't flinch. "I'll take care of it," he said simply. His calm tone contrasted sharply with the panic around him. He began working, moving with precision, repairing circuits, adjusting power flows, and carefully reconnecting damaged lines. His hands were steady, his focus unbroken. The princess watched him silently. She had expected him to refuse, to walk away again, or worse, to fail. But he worked quietly, methodically, with no desire for praise. Slowly, the system stabilized. The alarms died down, and the lights in the control room returned to normal. For a moment, everyone waited, holding their breath. Then the navigation core blinked steadily, indicating full functionality. Ethan straightened, wiped his hands, and looked up. His eyes met Elira's for the first time without avoidance. "You did it," she said, her voice softer than before. Ethan shrugged lightly. It wasn't impossible. Elira's cheeks burned with an unfamiliar feeling, pride mixed with surprise and something she couldn't name. She wanted to demand thanks, loyalty, even admiration, but she found she couldn't. Not yet. Her hands clenched at her sides, but she did not speak further. The rest of the crew was amazed. They had expected fear, desperation, maybe even a request for help from her, but instead, they witnessed something unusual, a human who acted out of duty, skill and calm resolve rather than fear or ambition. Even her guards exchanged uncertain glances. After the system was stabilized, Ethan turned to leave. Elira's voice stopped him, though she tried to keep it steady. "Why do you help me?" she asked, almost reluctantly. He paused in the doorway, tools in hand, and answered simply, "Because it was the right thing to do." Her brow furrowed. That answer confused her more than any insult she had thrown earlier. No one in her world acted without reason, without strategy, without expectation of gain. And yet, here was a man who acted quietly, without words, without fear, and without pride. Ethan left the ship and returned to the workshop. He didn't wait for applause, didn't pause for recognition, and didn't look back. That evening, he sat again on the roof, staring at the stars that glittered across the dark sky. From the ship's observation deck, Elira watched him. She could see him working, eating a small meal, then returning to his duties. She had expected the human to fade into insignificance after their first encounter. Instead, he had quietly proved himself in action, without arrogance, without seeking notice. She began to realize something that unsettled her. His silence, his calm, his refusal to act out of pride, were more powerful than her insults, her rank, or her guards. She had spent all her life wielding power through words and titles. But this human had shown her a different strength, one born not of fear, but of responsibility. The next few days passed with Ethan quietly fixing other machines, teaching younger workers simple techniques, and never drawing attention to himself. Elira continued to watch, learning in silence. For the first time, she felt curiosity that was not tied to pride or anger. She wondered what it meant to act without expectation, to walk away even when insulted, to do right simply because it was right. One evening, the ship's core required a small recalibration. Elira considered sending a guard, but she hesitated. She knew in a strange way that this human was the one capable of fixing it. When she finally approached him quietly in the workshop, she said, "I need your help again." Ethan looked up, neutral, calm. "Show me what's wrong," he said. No hesitation, no questions, no prideful remarks. Together they worked. The recalibration required patience and attention, and Ethan guided the process carefully, teaching her small corrections along the way. For the first time, Elira realized that learning from someone did not diminish her status. It revealed a new kind of respect, one earned quietly and sincerely. That night, as Ethan returned to his rooftop post to watch the stars, he felt a quiet satisfaction. Not pride, not boastfulness, just the calm knowledge that he had done what was necessary. Somewhere below, a young alien princess was beginning to understand that strength did not come from title or insult, but from steady action, responsibility, and courage. The desert was quiet again, but the air had changed. Something had shifted between them, subtle yet undeniable. The young princess, with all her pride and title, had met a human who refused to bend to fear or flattery. And though neither could see the full impact yet, the moment marked the beginning of something neither world had ever expected. Days passed, and the desert sun rose and fell with the same quiet rhythm. Ethan Cole continued his work at the repair station, methodical and steady. His hands moved over wires, engines, and circuits as if the machines themselves responded to his touch. He spoke little, smiled less, and focused entirely on the task at hand. The rhythm of his work was comforting, predictable, and entirely his own. Yet the presence of the Varan princess had introduced a subtle disturbance in the usual calm. Princess Elira did not leave. Instead, she lingered near the station, supervising her ship's repairs and watching the human mechanic who had so quietly defied her expectations. Her curiosity, previously mixed with irritation and pride, had grown into something more profound, a desire to understand how a human could act with such quiet confidence and purpose. It began with small questions. She would approach him with a request for minor adjustments on the ship or explanations of equipment she did not understand. Each time Ethan responded with the same calm simplicity. "Check the pressure lines. Adjust the flow slowly. The balance must be steady." He never raised his voice, never demanded respect, never sought praise. He simply did the work, and she observed. One afternoon, as the twin suns hung low over the desert horizon, Elira followed Ethan to a particularly old shuttle that had been damaged during a storm. The exterior was dented, the panels scratched and loose. Her voice, unusually soft for royalty, spoke for the first time without pride or accusation. "You really think this can be fixed?" Ethan glanced at her, his face calm, his eyes steady. "Everything can be fixed. It may take time, patience, and care, but it can be done. She frowned slightly, surprised by the simplicity of his words. In her life, solutions had always been complicated, surrounded by strategy, politics, and orders. Here was a human who approached problems plainly, directly, without pretense. That straightforwardness both frustrated and fascinated her. Ethan began the repairs, carefully aligning panels, adjusting circuits, and testing power systems. Elira watched, noting the precision of his movements, the thoughtfulness in each action. For the first time, she considered that strength might not come from power alone. Perhaps true strength came from diligence, patience, and an unwavering sense of purpose. Hours passed. The air grew cooler as the sun set, and Ethan finally stepped back. "Try it now," he said. The shuttle's systems hummed to life, lights flickering evenly across the control panels. The engines responded perfectly, and the craft stood ready for flight. Elira's breath caught slightly. She had not expected this result, not from a human, not from anyone outside her own people. She began, her words faltering. Pride clashed with astonishment. "I did not think it possible." Ethan smiled faintly, not boastfully, not arrogantly. "It's all about understanding what's broken and taking care of it one step at a time." She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. Her sharp silver eyes, accustomed to commanding, judging, and belittling, softened just slightly. The human mechanic before her was not remarkable because of rank or skill alone, but because of something deeper: integrity, patience, and quiet courage. Elira's pride, which had always defined her, now felt strangely irrelevant. Here was someone who did not bend to fear, who did not seek glory, who acted without expectation. She did not yet understand why, but she could feel the shift inside herself, a subtle awakening. Over the next several days, this pattern continued. Ethan worked diligently on other systems, and Elira observed him in silence. Sometimes she asked questions, sometimes she simply watched. With each passing moment, her respect grew, though her pride still kept her from acknowledging it openly. She found herself thinking of him when she should have been planning her journey home. She considered his actions, his patience, and the way he treated everyone around him, with calm fairness, without favor or disdain. One evening, the station experienced a minor electrical failure. The lights flickered, alarms sounded, and the younger workers panicked. Elira's guards froze, unsure how to act. Ethan, however, remained calm. He moved quickly, assessing the problem, rerouting circuits and restoring power within minutes. As the system stabilized, Elira stepped closer, curiosity mixed with something she did not yet understand. "Why do you do this?" she asked, her voice quiet but sincere. Ethan looked at her, his hands resting on the control panel. "Because it needs to be done. Nothing more, nothing less." Her mind struggled to process the simplicity of that statement. In her world, every action had meaning, every choice had consequence, every act was measured for power and advantage. Yet here was a human who acted out of principle alone, without expectation of reward or fear of punishment. That night, she returned to her observation deck, watching him from above. Ethan sat quietly, staring at the stars as he often did. There was a steadiness to him, a sense of calm that radiated outward, and she could not look away. For the first time, she questioned the lessons of her upbringing. She had been taught that respect must be commanded, that fear and prestige were the keys to influence. Yet here was someone who commanded respect without seeking it, who inspired quiet admiration without words. The next morning she approached him again, her pride tempered by genuine curiosity. "Show me how you determine what to fix first," she requested. Ethan looked at her, surprised only slightly by the tone. "There is always a first step," he said calmly. "Identify what is most urgent, what is causing the most harm. Then address it carefully. The rest follows." Together they walked through the repair process. Elira watched, learning not just the mechanics but the philosophy behind his actions. She began to understand that true leadership, true strength, and even wisdom came from responsibility, patience, and humility, qualities that did not require titles, armies, or power. By the end of the day, the princess felt a quiet transformation within herself. She had met many humans before, but none had impressed her in this way. Ethan Cole, the quiet mechanic, had challenged not just her expectations of humanity, but her understanding of herself. As the suns dipped below the horizon once more, casting long shadows across the desert. Elira realized something profound. Pride, when wielded carelessly, could blind even the most intelligent. And humility, when combined with skill and courage, could illuminate truths that no title or rank could reach. From the distance, Ethan worked silently, unaware of the shift he had inspired. His focus remained on the machines, on the task, on doing what was right. And though he did not yet know it, the princess had begun to see the world differently because of him. A small human who acted with dignity, patience, and quiet integrity, and so, the bond between them, unspoken yet undeniable, began to form, an unlikely connection that neither understood fully, but that would change the course of both their lives. Days in the desert passed slowly, but every moment seemed significant. Ethan Cole moved through his work as usual, quiet and methodical, tending to machines that hummed and clicked under his careful hands. The twin suns rose and fell, and yet he did not tire, nor did his focus falter. His work was steady, precise, and calm, a rhythm that had grown familiar to him over the years. Princess Elira, however, found her own rhythm unsettled. She had begun to follow Ethan more closely, sometimes silently observing as he repaired damaged shuttles or recalibrated engines. Each day her curiosity grew, and with it a strange respect. She had never met a human who acted with such quiet dignity, who worked with patience and care without seeking attention or reward. In her world, power and pride dictated every move, yet Ethan seemed untouched by these forces. One morning the princess approached him with a question she could not ignore. "Ethan," she began carefully, "how do you stay so calm even when everything seems broken?" He paused in his work, lifting a panel to check the wiring underneath. "Because worrying doesn't fix anything," he said simply. "You do what you can, step by step, and the rest will follow." She frowned slightly, not because she disagreed, but because she had never heard such words spoken with such conviction. In her life, decisions were always layered with politics, fear, and expectation. Yet here was someone who acted from principle, not pressure. That day, a minor accident occurred. A shuttle's engine, not fully repaired the previous week, sputtered and began overheating. Smoke curled from the vents, alarms shrieked, and the younger workers panicked. The princess's guards hesitated, unsure how to respond. Ethan, however, remained calm. He moved quickly, assessing the situation, disconnecting the overheating module and directing others to safety. Elira watched closely, her expression softening. She realized that what she had initially perceived as simplicity was actually skill and judgment. Ethan did not act recklessly or impulsively. Every motion, every choice was deliberate and thoughtful. When the engine stabilized, the princess spoke quietly, almost hesitantly. I should have doubted you less." Ethan looked at her briefly, then returned to his work. "Doubt isn't always a problem," he said. "It's how you respond that matters." For the first time, Elira felt a strange humility. She had been raised to command respect, to assert authority, and to expect obedience. Here she had met someone who commanded it without effort, without fear, and without words. She could not deny that she felt something she had never felt before, a sense of admiration, coupled with curiosity. Over the next few days, their interactions continued in a quiet rhythm. The princess asked questions, sometimes about repairs, sometimes about humans, and Ethan answered simply and honestly. She began to see patterns in his actions, how he approached problems, how he treated others, and how he valued patience over pride. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant dunes, Elira approached Ethan as he worked on a communication array. "Do you believe humans and aliens can truly understand each other?" she asked, her voice thoughtful and slightly hesitant. Ethan paused, considering her question. "Maybe," he said finally, "if one stops trying to feel superior and instead listens." Her gaze dropped, her mind racing. She had spent her life believing that understanding required power, influence, or control. Yet here was someone who suggested it came from humility and attention. The words struck her deeper than she expected. Later that night, the princess stood alone on the observation deck of her ship, staring at the stars. Her mind replayed the moments of the past few days. Ethan's calm hands, his quiet words, his focus on doing what was right rather than seeking approval. She realized that she had been proud, arrogant, and judgmental, but the human mechanic had shown her another way. She remembered the first insult she had hurled at him, the sharp words that were meant to wound or assert dominance, and yet he had turned and walked away unshaken, calm, and dignified. She had expected anger, confrontation, or perhaps fear, but none of those came. Instead, she had seen patience, quiet skill, and integrity. The contrast unsettled her. Pride, she realized, could blind people to truth, and humility, when paired with courage and skill, could illuminate truths that rank or power never could. She had learned this not from her advisors, not from her soldiers, but from a human mechanic who refused to bow to fear, pride, or expectation. The next morning, she approached Ethan with a request. "I need your help with a recalibration," she said, her tone softer than before. "The navigation system is showing errors I cannot fix." Ethan looked at her briefly, then nodded. "Show me the problem," he said, moving toward the ship. Together they worked in silence. He guided her through the process, explaining each step patiently. She began to understand not just the mechanics, but the philosophy behind his work, the careful observation, the steady hands, the patience, and the willingness to act without seeking credit. By the time the system was fully restored, the princess felt a quiet transformation within herself. She no longer saw Ethan merely as a human, nor did she see herself as superior. She saw the value of character, skill, and integrity, and she recognized the quiet power in those qualities. As the suns dipped below the horizon once more, casting long shadows across the desert, Elira realized that her pride had shifted. She had met someone who acted with true dignity, and she could not help but respect him for it. Her world had taught her to measure value by rank, title, and authority. But Ethan had taught her that strength could also be measured in patience, humility, and quiet courage. From the distance, Ethan returned to his rooftop perch, staring at the stars. He did not know the impact he had made, the quiet change he had inspired in the young princess. To him, it was simply another day, another set of tasks completed with care and diligence. And yet, for Princess Elira, the world felt subtly different. She had met someone who had challenged her assumptions, who had shown her a new way of understanding, and who had begun to teach her the value of quiet courage. The bond between them, unspoken but undeniable, continued to grow, preparing them both for the challenges and revelations that lay ahead. The night was quiet again, the desert still, yet both of them had been changed by their encounters, one through action, one through observation, and together they had begun a journey that neither had expected, but both would never forget. The day of departure arrived. Princess Elira's silver ship, gleaming under the twin suns, stood ready on the landing pad. Guards moved briskly, checking every detail while she surveyed the station one last time. Her expression was unreadable, yet inside, a quiet storm of thought and reflection raged. Ethan Cole worked as usual, his hands busy with a small hover vehicle that needed tuning before the ship left. He moved with his typical calm, checking every wire, every pressure line, every connection. He had done this countless times, and yet today felt different, though he did not fully understand why. The princess watched from the observation deck, her silver eyes following him closely. She had been learning from him for days, observing not just his skill with machines, but the steadiness of his character. There was no pretense, no pride, no rush for recognition, only calm, careful, purposeful work. Her advisors and guards expected drama, perhaps a formal farewell, perhaps some grand statement of gratitude. But Elira found herself uncertain. She wanted to acknowledge him, to express something more than mere words, yet pride and habit restrained her. She had spent her life measuring actions by titles and rank, but Ethan had taught her that true value was shown through deeds, not through words or status. She descended quietly to the lower deck, her steps soft against the metal floor. The hum of the ship filled the air, but she ignored it, her focus entirely on the human mechanic, who had changed her perspective in ways she could not yet fully explain. Ethan looked up briefly as she approached. "You're ready?" he asked, not raising his voice, not trying to command attention. His tone was calm, natural, almost as if he was asking a simple question rather than acknowledging the importance of her presence. "Yes," she said, her voice quieter than usual. It was not the proud, sharp tone she had used the first day they met. There was something softer, something hesitant yet sincere. He nodded once and returned to his work, adjusting the final wires on the hover vehicle. The silence stretched between them, comfortable yet filled with unspoken understanding. She realized that she did not need to demand attention or assert authority. His actions had already shown her what mattered. Once the vehicle was stabilized and ready, Ethan stepped back and gave a small, approving nod. "That should hold until the next inspection," he said. Elira studied him for a long moment. She wanted to say more, thank him, praise him, admit the lessons she had learned. Yet words felt inadequate. Instead, she simply said, "Take care, Ethan Cole." He looked up at her, a faint smile crossing his face. "You too, Princess, no grand gestures, no dramatic bow, no ceremonial farewell. Just two individuals acknowledging each other with quiet respect. And in that simplicity, there was a power that no ceremony could convey." As the ship's engines hummed and light began to pulse through the craft, Elira turned her gaze to the horizon. She thought of the days she had spent watching, learning, and reflecting. She thought of her pride, her past assumptions, and the humility she had begun to feel. Most of all, she thought of the human mechanic who had shown her a strength far greater than her own. Strength built on patience, calm, skill, and integrity. Ethan watched the ship prepare for departure. He did not need to see her reaction to know the effect he had made. He had acted as he always did, simply, honestly, and with care. That had always been enough. Finally, the engines roared, sending vibrations through the ground. The silver craft rose slowly, then accelerated into the sky, leaving trails of light behind it. Elira watched silently from the observation deck, her thoughts heavy yet enlightened. She realized that respect was earned, not demanded. She realized that pride could be tempered by understanding, and that true leadership came from integrity, not fear or title. As the ship disappeared into the horizon, she whispered softly to herself,
"He is the first human who ever made me see things differently."
"And I will never forget him." Below, Ethan returned to his workbench. He did not dwell on the departure, for his focus remained on the tasks before him. Yet for the first time in many days, a faint sense of fulfillment settled over him. Not pride, not boastfulness, but quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing one has acted rightly. The desert was calm once more. The sun sank behind distant dunes, casting long shadows that stretched across the repair station. Machines hummed softly. The wind carried the faint scent of warm metal, and the stars began to glimmer faintly in the darkening sky. Ethan stood for a moment looking out over the desert expanse. The day had been long, the work had been steady, and yet he felt a rare sense of peace. Meanwhile, in the silent vacuum of space, Princess Elira reflected on the days she had spent on the station. She realized that her experiences with Ethan had left a lasting mark on her, not because of any royal decree or social expectation, but because of the quiet dignity and steady integrity he had shown. She had learned lessons that no tutor, advisor, or book could teach her. Her thoughts lingered on his words, simple, honest, and full of meaning. The way he had turned and left when insulted, the way he had returned to help without pride or expectation, and the way he had acted with calm determination, all of it had shown her something profoundly new. Elira understood that the galaxy was far larger than her own experience had allowed her to see. And within it, there were individuals whose courage, patience, and honesty could change the course of understanding, regardless of species or rank. Back on Earth, Ethan continued his work quietly, unaware of the depth of the change he had inspired. Yet his actions had created a ripple, subtle but undeniable, in the life of the young princess and perhaps in the wider galaxy as well. The station settled into the evening calm. Ethan cleaned his tools, checked the final systems, and stepped outside to feel the cool desert wind on his face. The stars shone brilliantly overhead, and he allowed himself a small smile. The day had been long, but it had been good. He had done what was right, and in the quiet of the desert night that was enough. Far above, the silver ship traveled through the void, carrying Princess Elira home. She sat in her observation chamber, reflecting on the lessons she had learned. Not about technology, not about diplomacy, but about human character. She realized that her encounters with Ethan Cole had changed her perception of leadership, humility, and strength. And as she looked back toward the tiny blue planet, she felt a quiet sense of gratitude for the human who had refused to be intimidated, who had acted with quiet courage, and who had left her with lessons she would carry for the rest of her life. The universe was vast, The stars infinite, and yet in that vastness, a single human mechanic had shown her a truth that no galaxy or empire could teach. Respect, integrity, patience, and courage were far more powerful than pride, titles, or fear. And so the story ended not with grand gestures, not with speeches or ceremonies, but with the quiet, enduring power of two lives intersecting in the desert. One continued on his path, humble and steadfast, and the other carried forward the lessons of that meeting, forever changed by the simple dignity of a human mechanic who had turned, walked away, and yet left a mark she would never forget. The desert night was silent. The stars twinkled above, and the galaxy, vast and mysterious, held the promise of many more lessons yet to come.